Welcome to Cooking Cheap, Easy, and Tasty Meal. Okay, I really like vanilla wafers, and the company who made the vanilla wafers I liked was a company called Jack's. And it appears that they went out of business sometime last year because really haven't seen any, haven't been around in a long time, and I did a little looking, and sure enough, they've gone out of business. I had a couple recipes for vanilla wafers, but it never made sense to make any. But I'm going to try this recipe, which I've had for a while, and see if it's comparable. First off, I've got a half cup of butter that I've softened. I left it out, but it's too cool in the house for this to get soft, so I put it in the microwave for a little while to help soften it. To that, I'm going to add 1 cup of sugar. This is golden sugar, so it's got a little more molasses in it than regular sugar, but it shouldn't affect, if anything, it should make the flavor better. So there's 1 cup of that. And we're going to mix that up, cream the sugar and butter together. Now, for some things I think it really matters. Maybe for everything it matters, but for cookies, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference how well you mix this part up. I guess it could make some difference in the overall texture, but I can't tell from the cookies that the sugar and butter are not mixed well enough when I make them, so maybe by the time you finish stirring everything together, it is not a problem. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to add my egg. And if you're more comfortable, you could do it in separate bowls. Those eggs typically break pretty well and are usually fine. And I'm going to add a fair amount of vanilla. That's about 1 tablespoon. I like a strong vanilla flavor in the cookies. So I'm going to just mix that up pretty well. See, by the time you put the eggs in and the vanilla, the extra moisture seems to bring the butter and sugar together, and you end up with a pretty creamy mixture anyway. So I'm not convinced that really is essential for most cookies, but follow the directions that you're comfortable with following. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add all-purpose flour. We're going to add 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And generally, I just scoop the flour and scrape it off to make sure I've got an even measure. I'm going to put in a half cup at a time, and I'm going to go ahead and put it all in at one time. You might find it's easier to mix if you do it a little bit at a time, but I'm going to go ahead and do it this way just to make it more convenient for me. If you have a mixer, you might want to use that. I really wanted to do this by hand to show you it's easy and it can be done by hand. The last things I want to add are the salt, just a pinch, and some baking powder, just a little bit. I'm just going to grab a small amount of it. You don't want them to rise too much, about 3/4 of a teaspoon. The next thing I want to do is mix the cookies, flour mixed in. So again, if you have a mixer, this is probably a little easier, but you can do it by hand. It just takes a little more time. Just kind of turn it around, take the bottom and move it up to the top, and over a few minutes you'll have it mixed together. It looks like it's really a dry dough, but it's really not. The moisture hasn't mixed in with the flour yet. Just keep pushing it into it and mixing it and turning it, and pretty soon it's going to be a fairly smooth dough. Let's scrape the sides a little bit and get those. Make sure that's getting in there. See how now it's kind of a smooth cookie dough. So I'm pretty pleased with that. So I'm going to scrape down the spatula and Put it over to the side. And now we have basically a fairly simple cookie dough. Now, you could let this rest for a little while, put it in the refrigerator, which certainly would not be a bad idea. Okay, I'm going to prepare some cookies. Now, last time I made this recipe, I used a cookie scoop that was about 2 tablespoons, and that seemed to be a little big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just try and take a teaspoon and just get something about that size out. A little smaller than I tried last time, and see how much they spread. See if they actually will be a little smaller if I use a little smaller dough ball. This is about half the size of the ones I made the last time. And we'll see that, hopefully that'll spread out to about the size that I want my vanilla wafers to be. It's a little too small. Okay. So they're a little different. They're not all perfectly the same size or anything, but they'll be sufficient. Now what I'm going to do with the dough, I'm going to cover it and stick it in the refrigerator and let it cool while I cook this first batch of cookies. Okay, there's our first batch. We're going to let them cool, and then we're going to see if they're crisp enough. They probably could be cooked a little longer. They're not as brown as I would like. They're also a little bigger than I would have actually wanted, but they're not terrible. What I'd mainly like to have is at least a little crispness to them. Obviously, they're bigger than traditional vanilla wafers, but we'll see what they're like when they're cool. Maybe they'll still be as crisp, and I can make them a little bit smaller and accomplish the same thing. Okay, let's try one of the cookies. First thing, well, not totally crisp, but it did break pretty well. Very crunchy, and they got a strong vanilla flavor. They need to be a little bit smaller and a little bit, maybe cook a little bit longer, but that would be fine to go in a banana pudding or to make a crust out of if you wanted to make a vanilla wafer crust. A really easy cookie to make. Try them. Let me know what you figure out, and if you have any suggestions on how to make them either a better size, perhaps rolling them more smoothly so that they would come out as a more smooth cookie would help. Maybe pressing them down will help. I'm going to try a couple things and we'll see what happens. This batch I made a little bit smaller and rolled and flattened on the tray, and I'm going to see how they come out. These are the cookies after 14 minutes, which is 2 minutes longer than the last batch, and they obviously look more like vanilla wafers because of the shape. So I used a smaller dough ball and I rounded it up and pressed it before I cooked them. And they definitely have more of a look of a vanilla wafer. Still not quite as brown, but I'm not going to expect to get the same color as one that's done by machine. I think that's the method. Make them about a teaspoon in volume, roll them in your hands, press them down, and then cook them for 12 to 15 minutes is what I would say, but 14 is what these were, 14 or a little more. If you look at the color, they're starting to brown on top and everything, but I'm afraid to cook them much longer because the sides might get burned. And I will tell you that as the longer they sit, the crisper they get. I hope you try them and I hope you enjoy them. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give us a like. Thank you.